In addition, it is the Commissioner of Public Safety, Sean Tindell. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Well, doing well. How are you doing this morning, Paul?
Busy, as we always do on a Monday, not to say that you guys are not busy. There were a couple of things happening, and first of all, on the tragic of the Summit Police Department, our policemen, your thoughts on that?
It's just another example of how dangerous the job is for these law enforcement officers across our state and really our nation. I mean, I think about, and I spoke recently on the coast at a law enforcement officers benefit function, and you know, we've had 5 officers down here in 5 years in the coastal counties that have been killed in the line of duty, and much like the Summit, you know, gunned down by a criminal and somebody that had no appreciation for their life, much less anybody else's. And so it's a very dangerous job, and these men and women that wear that badge every day, the respect that they're really owed and due just for wanting to make those sacrifices so that we can have safer neighborhoods. And it just, you know, whether you're in Biloxi or you're in Tupelo or it's down in small cities like Summit, it's a dangerous job, and one in which these men and women deserve the utmost respect and appreciation for the sacrifices they make.
We've got to get away from this idea that when we see some of this on social media, a bad cop or a cop who's not trained properly, that is a large portion of a police department. It's not. Most of our officers out there, black, white, brown, fuchsia, men and women, do a great job. And the amazing thing about this is when their life, I just think, in my personal statistic here, when their life is the most at risk is when sometimes they think it's a low, dangerous environment. Walking up to a car, and it doesn't look like it's going to be dangerous, or a domestic dispute, those are some of the most dangerous.
Absolutely. And you look at this situation down in Summit, it was a safety checkpoint in the middle of the day. So you're really not anticipating there to be much in the way of that type of danger, you know, in midday on a Thursday, and, you know, checking to make sure folks have their driver's license and insurance. And, you know, it turns out that this guy had been out, had been a convicted felon, and had warrants out for his arrest, and, you know, didn't want to go back to jail. And it's eerily similar to the situation in Hattiesburg a few years ago where, you know, the guy that's got warrants out for his arrest, he knows it, doesn't want to go back to jail, and it's going to go down this way. And it's unexpected. And you know, that's one thing I try to remind folks when we're talking about law enforcement and officers and those that want to paint them in just a broad stroke bad light. Everybody has a bad day, you know, and if I have a bad day, I might slam my door and you know, go on about my day, but they can't afford to have a bad day out there. People have cell phones in their face. They can't afford to be off. I mean, their life's on the line. And we need to remember the stresses that they're under when we're dealing with them. And I don't think it's asking too much just to be respectful. And, you know, if there's an issue, there's a court, and that's where you take those issues. But we've lost sight of that, I think, as a state sometimes, in the country, and some of these people that just want to paint that broad stroke that law enforcement is the problem. These men and women do this job for very little pay, again, because they have a servant's heart, and they're looking to make their communities safe. And it doesn't matter if you're in, I said, a big town or a little town, if it's a Thursday or a Friday night. They can encounter danger at any moment, and they have to be prepared. They have to be on their best, and they've got to be that way 100% of the time.
It really does bug me and a lot of other folks, especially in this audience, the amount of testing that they get, pushback that they get now because of social media, getting in their face, almost spitting in their face. And a lot of times when an officer to train for this would almost like to have a drill sergeant in his face hours a day just to be able to hold their temper. And as you said, if maybe there was a dispute at home or some financial problems and everything else, that officer is already just a little off kilter and could lose it. But they are being pushed, and I hate to see that.
I do too. And you know, when you think about incidences like this, when you see the families, you see the communities, and how much most people appreciate it, it really just it takes some of those social media keyboard warriors to really drive it in a bad light. And, in turn, it makes it harder and harder for us to recruit young people into this profession, which, I think is an extremely honorable profession and one in which I'd love to see more young people take an interest in. But we got to get a grip on those types of things. But we also, look, there's a segment of our population and that has, I said earlier, little value for their own life, much less anybody else's. And it just feels like to me this is becoming a more dangerous job every day because of that element. And we've got to, and there was an old saying, Governor Reeves would say, we got to figure out who we're scared of and we got to figure out who we're mad at. And those that we're scared of, we need to lock them up and keep them in jail.
Absolutely.
There's no reason for people like this to be running around on our streets.
Did want to ask you this, when I think it was Fred Shank's House Rules Committee, that it was HB 691, and it was it's a status report. I mean, it's a law enforcement and training center addressing. There was an initiative passed or something, not an initiative, a law passed, HB 691, to update the training at the law enforcement. Any update on that one, or I know it's just July is just behind us, but anything on that?
We've got our first board meeting coming up in September with the revised board. We've had some preliminary discussions about some of the things that we want to do for enhanced training, and also now that Sheriff's Department as well as state law enforcement are required to get continuing education, make sure that's in place. I intend to get with the legislature this year and ask them to propose legislation requiring all departments to offer bulletproof vests to all law enforcement, make it mandatory. We have some programs that we can help local departments issue bulletproof vests, but it just needs to be mandatory. It needs to be as mandatory as having a radio or a firearm.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was.
Officer vest.
Huh. Was the officer at Summit wearing one?
He was not. He was not. And, it just needs to be part of the equipment that's mandatory, that has to be issued. And if you're going to have a police department, it's just the cost of doing business. It's worth it to help protect the lives of these officers that every one of them gets a vest if they're out there patrolling.
I think some things are happening as more and more people are becoming more disgruntled about what's going on in our capital city. When the better news is the Capital District, and the other one, the rest of it is still falling apart. I hate to see this. Matt Walsh, who has a tremendous following nationwide, was talking about the violent crime rate in the city of Jackson. 97% of all cities, they're in the 97th percentile of all cities in America in violent crime. As a matter of fact, beating or worse than several third world countries out there. Your thoughts?
It's a very complex problem, and it's one in which I know we need a stronger police force. We need more police officers, and we've been helping with that with Capitol Police. But it's not something that we're going to police our way out of. There's got to be something where we're addressing these youthful offenders. And if you look at a lot of the violent crimes, they're being committed by teenagers, and they're coming from environments that's hard for us to imagine.
We got to get you back in the studio. We don't have enough time on this one, but I got to get you back in, and we'll line that up.
We'd love it. We'd love to be there, and prayers for Summit, prayers for those families. We're thinking of them, and just prayers for all the law enforcement out there. And
you got that right. Jeremy England's coming up in a moment. Wait, hang on. I got another break here. It's Sean Tindell. So thank you for hanging on for a second or two. But on this, when you say it's a complicated matter, as far as the crime in the city of Jackson, isn't the first thing to find out who these kids are? What percentage, Sean, do you think it is of kids committing these crimes? And most of them is probably going to be recidivism, the same thing over and over. Repeat.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's just a city of Jackson problem. I mean,
no, it's not.
I look at Gulfport, I look at Columbus, and I'd say a lot of the auto burglaries, a lot of the violent crimes that are being committed are certainly teenagers, and so, and then again, it's what do you do with them once you arrest them? They've got to be in schools. Or you can, like to charge them as an adult, but once they do that, you put them in the adult system, they have to be separated, and then ultimately they're entitled to a bond and they can bond out. And and they're coming from homes again that are situations most of us can't imagine. And so it's like I said, I think it's very complicated, but I do think it starts with having a strong police force, a greater police presence. But we got to look at ways to show these young people a way to a better life, I think. And I don't know what that is. I'm no expert in.
But that's a generational or cultural change. Because you're a nice guy, and you don't want to say that. I don't think you want to say this, and I think a lot of other people would be the same way. To solve that, if you took feelings out of it and everything else, is you got to put up more jails. You have to spend money, even if it costs more taxes. Hate to say that. And you have to put them in a jail that corresponds with their age. Whether you try to teach them something, fine if they're teachable. If not, the number one job is to take those criminals, those potential killers, those car thieves off the streets into incarceration so everybody else, white, black, and brown, and fuchsia, can be protected. That's it.
100%. 100%. And you got to start at an early age. You got to have programs in place that if they're in bad homes, we give them a pathway to a better life, maybe somewhere else. And from the federal perspective, we've got to stop incentivizing the breakdown of the family network. You look at the programs that have been in place for a while now, and they do everything they can to take away any incentive for folks to get married and stay together and raise a family. And now for generation after generation after generation of seeing people raising broken homes, and then they're raising their grandkids in broken homes and their great-grandkids, it's a failed policy. It's a failed mindset. We need to be doing everything we can to incentivizing folks to stay together. And when you have a child, you stay together. You raise that child together. And I used to hear when I was on the court, stories of parents that wouldn't give up their custodial rights to their kids because they love their kids. Well, they hadn't seen their kid in 3 years. Loving your kid's the easy part. Raising your kid is the challenge, and it's the tough part. And we need to create incentives that give people more, desire to stay together. When they have a child, that they got to raise that child together and strengthen the bonds of the family network. And a lot of these problems go away if we just have good moms and dads that value their children and raise them in a way that shows them values and a pathway to a better future.
Nobody's going to disagree with it. And I've used this analogy once before. It's almost like the guy's going to die of a heart attack because of overweight, just morbidity, or morbidly obese. Then the first thing you got to do is give him an emergency surgery as far as a belly buster operation or something like that. But the long term is weight control. And it's the same thing here. We got to get those killers off the streets, and then the cultural thing is we got to change culture. But it's two different facets of that, and both of them almost impossible. Very difficult, but almost impossible.
That's right. And when you look at the situation again, going back to Summit, this is somebody, a relatively young person, 24, 25 years old, already had a criminal record. There was a warrant out for his arrest. He knew it. And just, was not going to go back to jail that day. And I'll tell you one of the most shocking things, and it's still under investigation, and there's a lot of things that we have to go through and look at. But after he shot the first officer, he was on the run and was actually posting on social media about just killing somebody, and that they were after him. And it's just mind-boggling that anybody would get on social media in that situation and start posting about it.
I see.
Again, that shows you where a lot of these young people's minds are and what they're doing.
Absolutely. They want that audience. To them, they would almost give up their freedom, they don't think about it, for the chance to be viral for just one time. That's it. It sounds ludicrous, but it's not. They would give it up just to be viral. In the midst of knowing that they're going to jail, they're going to hold on to that phone as long as they can, and they want to live stream.
That's right. And then you look, and here we have, Troy Floyd and his family. I mean, from all accounts, I didn't know him personally, but everybody talked about how great of a man this person was. A family man, somebody that cared about his brothers in law enforcement, cared about his community, was passionate about public service, and he's just been taken away from us too soon again at the hands of a criminal that was more concerned about getting on social media than worrying about the lives of his brothers and sisters in this state. So it's just tragic. Just very tragic.
The commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, it's a tougher job now than it's ever been. I look at this in the same way as our curriculum in school needs to look at the new digital world and social media platforms that we're living in, and the jobs and tasks that are ahead of us. And sometimes for police officers and their training and the laws of the state of Mississippi, where it doesn't bump into the Constitution, federal or state, is to update them to what social media pressures are putting on law enforcement. Not only that, but just the world we're living in today. And sometimes I think we're outdated on that.
I think you're right. And look, it's one of those, I think, things that has come on to us really fast.
Yes.
The last 10,
yes.
15 years has changed more than anybody could imagine. And we've got to learn ways to better address it. And we talk a lot about bullying young people, but there's never any discussion about, well, how does that feel for an officer who all of a sudden goes viral on social media and the pressures they feel from that.
Yes.
And then the instinct to just get on social media and post everything that you're doing. It's, again, things that we got to look at and address from a mental health standpoint.
Well, and we got two other things, too, is the tougher it gets, the harder it is to get new men and women, the young men and women, into that field. They look at it and say, dude, the dangers are enough. Do I want to get in there? Because you're looking for the people to get in there for the right reasons, not to be able to carry a gun and push power. And it's more and more difficult, and I know you know this. And the second thing is, if we've got gang problems now, what is it, and we don't do something about it, what the heck are we going to do in 10 years with the amount of illegals having just the run of the road now? And my God, if they win in November, who knows what it's going to be like 4 years from now?
Well, when you look at the policies of the Biden administration and the overdose deaths that we saw, the fentanyl coming across our border, human trafficking and gangs, it's mind-boggling that anybody would think that those are good policies and ones that we should continue with, except, that's what we're dealing with right now in this presidential race. And I think there's a stark difference between the two candidates about those types of issues, and one is about protecting our American borders and our American values, and the other one just not so much. So I think folks are going to have a decision to make in November, and elections have consequences, so choose wisely.
That is an understatement. I think in the old days they say you had to have a COVID to show your COVID shot. You had to have a COVID shot. I think to go to some of these concerts or gatherings where they are, you have to show you've had a lobotomy, and then you could get in. But that's another thing. It is a pleasure, sir. I thank you. We'll get you in the studio soon. Okay.
Look forward to it. Y'all have a great night.
Sean Tindell, the Commissioner of Public Safety.